Okay, I'm just going to give it another minute while we get some people. I have set up the space so that those that have their video on are not being shown at the moment, so you don't feel like you need to talk to us. But welcome to the people that are in the room with us today. We will just give it another minute or so, and I will kick off this session today that is brought to you by Chapel and York. All right, I am going to get started today. Welcome to our first Freedom Friday event brought to you by the Fundraising Nest and Chapel and York. My name is Michelle Berryman. I am the Chief Nester of the Fundraising Nest, and I want to say a huge thank you to our guests today. We are absolutely totally international. I am here in Melbourne, and I have Lachlan with us here, who is going to be answering any questions in the chat. And we have Nancy Bixon, who is the Managing Director of Chapel in York, with over 40 years experience in providing advice to clients and charities worldwide. And Nancy is in the UK and it's 1 o'clock in the morning. So thank you, Nancy, for joining us. And over in New York, we have Heather Hill, who is the Head of International Philanthropy for Chapel and York and leads both charity management services and a global network of foundations. Thank you both so much for joining us today. Heather, you've been a huge fan of the Fundraising Nest and you're one of our mavens, and thank you so much for joining our fledgling organisation and our kind of desire for everyone to learn. Freedom Friday is an initiative set up by the Fundraising Nest, and we want to get the movement, get the message out there that dedicated time to learn is super important for fundraisers. I'm going to go back to Ken Burnett, who I always quote: the difference between a merely good and a truly great fundraiser is that the truly great fundraiser knows more. It's pretty simple. So the more we know, the more we can do our job. So thank you. This has been recorded today. Thank you for everyone who has registered. I know if you're not here, you will be sent the recording and we will send this further out. So the session today, a world of possibilities or a world of trouble. Heather and Nancy are going to demystify international fundraising and discover the essentials of international fundraising with a bit of a 101 introduction. And I'm excited about this because my knowledge is limited in this space. So over to you, and please, tell us all about international fundraising. It is an open interactive session. We want you to jump in, turn your video on, unmute yourself, ask questions. They're here for you to be asked. So over to you, Heather and Nancy.
Yes, I will let Nancy get started with some of the important things to know when it comes to international fundraising.
Thanks, Heather. Well, let me just start by saying that the extreme obvious issue, which is that to some extent, international fundraising is the same as local fundraising, except you're not there. And it's more expensive and it's more time-consuming, but essentially you are still looking to connect with your alumni, your graduates, supporters, etc., in the same meaningful way that you would a local person. And that's key to the whole thing. And having said that, of course, we need to remember that that it is the complication of the fact that you aren't physically there. It is well, like today. I mean, I'm in the middle of my night. But so some of the questions that you have to ask about fundraising internationally are different. in those terms, because you're thinking about different cultural issues. You're thinking about how do you cultivate someone when you can't invite them necessarily to come back to where you are. All those kinds of issues are things that we need to think about. Heather's going to talk about that a bit. I'm going to just set the stage on the sort of tax and legal side of things. If you're in Australia, you will know obviously that you can give tax deductions if you're a DGR. If you're in other countries, you're going to have local registrations that you can give tax deductions for. In most places around the world, and your supporters, the person you're talking to, is not going to be interested in giving to you because they have tax benefits. They're going to be interested in giving to you because you've made the case of why they should be supporting you. Whether it's because they already know you, because they've been at your school, because they've been at your university, because they have seen what your charity is doing. Those are the reasons people are going to give. But a lot of times, and in a lot of countries, it's just such an important thing to be able to offer a tax benefit to people. And when you're talking about being a foreign organization, then generally what you're going to have to do is to find a local partner to be able to offer those tax benefits, because just about everywhere in the world, if there's tax benefits at all for money leaving the country, and in some countries there aren't, Australia being one of them, and I'm sure that those people that are in New Zealand know that a lot. But if you're Australia, no benefits basically if the money's going to leave the country. Same thing from Singapore. Same things from a lot of countries in Asia. Even if you're giving to a local charity, Europe and North America, pretty much you can get tax benefits even if the money leaves the country, and in other parts of the world as well. But the key is the local organization that you give to, which then gives the money on to you, and your donors get the benefit, and you get the money basically. Chaplain York, we have foundations in 6 countries: Canada, the US, UK, Europe, and Hong Kong, through which you can do that. You can have a fund your donors can give to us, and we'll give the money to you. They get the tax benefits. So it and we also set up and run dedicated legal entities. But you need to figure out what the right way for you to do it is. So Heather's going to talk a lot about identifying who's going to be interested, and just really starting from scratch is whether it's even worth doing. And it may be worth doing, identifying a partner in a country and just knowing that these things exist, even if you're deciding that on a proactive basis you're not going to be fundraising internationally. It's at least worth knowing what the possibilities are, because sure as anything, somebody's going to come up to you, and say, "Oh, I'd really like to give you a donation. Can I get a US tax deduction? Could we get gift aid in the UK?" Etc. And it's just worth at least knowing that these possibilities exist if you don't already. Everyone is always, there's a great interest in America because people do have alumni in the States. People have alumni, they have supporters. They see that America is a big market, and of course it is, but it may not be the right market for you. The right market for you may be the UK, which I have to give a slight plug for, because gift aid, which is totally different from tax deductions anywhere in the world. We always do tend to do these sort of strange things here in this country, but gift aid adds 25% to a donation you receive. So it's not a benefit to the donor, it's a benefit to the recipient charity. So it's a great benefit. So if somebody gives you £100, the UK government's going to give you an extra £25 when that donation's made to a UK registered charity, and then it comes on to you. So that's kind of a really exciting thing. So again, it may not be worth, I mean, it's always worth just knowing what's out there, knowing what's available. We can help. There are other players in the space as well that can help. We like to think we're good at it, and we know we are, and we're pretty, I think, cost effective. But this isn't an advert for us. This is really about just ensuring that you're aware of what's out there, so that the tax benefits can come to your donors if indeed that's they're in that particular country. It's relatively straightforward money coming from America, again through a US 501c3. Canada's a bit more difficult because they've got a very strange system there, in terms of having to actually partner with you, and there's all kinds of things. Mostly it just works the same as anything else with a whole lot of different words. And Europe is just Europe. It's a bit nutty. Every country is different. And as of now, there is no European-wide or EU-wide charity which will work in every country, although there has been some regulations that have come into Europe saying that within 2 years, that may be possible. But it being Europe, that may not actually happen in the time frame that they're talking about. So tax and legal stuff, it's just worth knowing, as you know, in your own country. It's just worth tucking in the back of your, the old-fashioned Rolodexes. It's now, on your email thing, that there's just something out there that you can deal with. It's at least worth offering that and being able to offer it, so that people will, number one, feel that you've made the effort to understand what their situation is, and number two, that if they're going to get the benefit, or if you're going to get the benefit, it's worth doing. So I won't go on any more on that, because that's not the most exciting thing in the world to start your morning with. So we'll turn over to Heather to who's going to start by talking about what sort of things you should be thinking about, whether it's worth going forwards with looking at your supporters, your alumni abroad. Heather?
Yes, actually, before I jump in that, I'm going to throw a question over to you, which is you talked about how they're intermediaries and partners who can help you in country, so where you don't have to set something up, you can work through the partner in order to be able to offer your donors tax benefits and yet still be able to receive funds. What would your counsel be to someone who says, oh, but I want to set up my own entity in a different country. I want to set up a US 501c3. I want to set up a registered charity in the UK. What are pros and cons of doing that versus working with a partner?
Good question. Over the 25, almost 30 years now that we've been setting up and running these entities, 20 years ago, everyone set up their own 501c3 in America. Now everyone's getting rid of their 501c3s in America, because my advice, I suppose, is, unless you really have a specific reason for wanting your own dedicated legal entity, it's probably not worth it. It's not to say that it couldn't be in certain circumstances, but it's not worth having one because the school next door has one, or the university next door has one, or the cathedral next door has one, or any of those things. It's not because you've got an alumni or alumnus who says, you got to have your own. The problem with entities nowadays is the regulatory regimes in every country's got more specific. It's got harder to do things. The reporting is greater. But the number one thing is just the banking. Banking is so painful and so difficult. And we've got people who, when we're trying to get somebody on a bank account, can spend half a day sitting in the bank trying to get things on. And that's, what you're doing when you're setting up a legal entity is you're setting up something which is a charity. And it's got to do all the regulatory things as any other charity in the world would be doing, and any other charity in that country with all the regulations. But yet all you're trying to do is to fundraise. So, if you're not fundraising in a country, so say you say America's it, that's where I'm really interested. So we're setting this thing up because everybody in the world's got a 501c3 and we think we need to be there. But you don't fundraise for a couple of years. You still have to do all the regulatory stuff. You still have to file all the same tax returns. So the cost of doing things still goes on, even if you're not getting any benefit. So my initial advice is, unless there is some really specific thing that would make it absolutely necessary or useful for you to have a legal entity, having a fund with a foundation, whether it's ours or somebody else's, is a really good way of getting money from fundraising without needing to, lock yourself into all the tax and legal issues. Now, that's not to say that it's not the right thing for some organizations. Having your own legal entity does mean your name is attached to it. It does mean that you do all the you make all the considerations, whereas if you're dealing with something else and somebody else's, even ours, you're going to have to work with us on it, which is not a bad thing. But it does, it in most cases, I would say there's a very you have to make a good business case for having a legal entity.
I jump in there and ask Nancy a question following on from that, Heather. We all know that ultimately we have to make giving as enjoyable and as easy as possible. And would there be a difference in an organisation setting up their own entity versus using an intermediate in terms of the experience for the donor?
Good question too. I think that if the intermediary that you're working with is doing a good job, they should be giving a good experience, as much as your own, and sometimes and often a better experience, because for example, we've got people on the ground that are dealing with just with that foundation, whereas if you're dealing with your own legal entity, often you don't have staff on the ground. Question, do you need staff on the ground? We can talk about that later, because the answer is no, but having somebody representing you is probably not a bad idea. But you're not often having admin staff, so you're not having that person who's sitting in the mailroom, like we have, like other people have, who can say, yes, you've got the donations come in, but you should be, whoever is providing the service should be giving you a good service. So you need absolutely to know when a donation comes in, and when the receipt goes out, because you need to be able to steward that donation as quickly as possible. And I would also say that there's some organizations that offer to get your donations in, that don't do that because they're free, and I can't believe sometimes that fundraisers sign up to some of these organizations and say, well, it doesn't cost you anything, or it's really, really, really cheap to do it. And they say, oh, we're going to do that because it's cheap. Well, but you don't give yourself the opportunity to be the really good fundraiser that you want to be, because a really good fundraiser wants to get that, to know that donations come in and to steward that donation as quickly as possible. So saying, oh, well, they don't cost anything, but that we don't know about the donation for 3 months, or we don't know about even who's made the grant, so we have to depend on the donor telling us they're making the grant. I mean, what kind of fundraising? And people do that. I mean, we hear it, that they are willing to sacrifice the professionalism that they have as a fundraiser for a cheap option. And I think that's really awful. But you're right, the donor should be able to have a good experience. Yes, okay, they're giving to somebody else, and every now and then you do get somebody who says, well, how do I know you're going to get the money? And the answer is often, well, that's the kind of quid pro quo, is that the intermediary in that country, and it would be the same even with your own organization, has to still make decisions about the use of the funds. I always said, that we would only steal the money if we had a huge enough amount of money coming in. The biggest single grant I think we've got, Heather, has been 16 million, and we decided that wasn't big enough yet. So I think most people are probably safe, because you have to be able to retire forever, of course. Nobody would ever use you again. as a business, it's not, or as a professional thing, it's not a very good idea. But you do every now and then say, well, how do you get somebody who's a little bit concerned about it? But again, a good professional intermediary who is working with you, who understands the needs of ensuring that that your donor is being looked after because it's your donor, and that you are getting information so that you can steward the donation is really important. And so the donor relationship should be as good as possible, whether you have your own or not. And that's, I think, the other final thing I would say on this thing is that lots of people do set up these entities, and they do weird things. So they have a board member getting the getting the donations, and the board member might go on holiday, so you might not know the donations come in for 3 weeks until they get back from holiday, or it's summer, so 6 weeks they're away in Noosa or something, and so it is important really to that you offer as good a relationship as you possibly can, and that may mean working again with a company that's offering the management services for that legal entity, so that you are giving the same good donor relations as you would locally.
Thank you. For those who are still joining us, thank you. We are with Nancy Bixon and Heather Heldrum Chapel and York. Very much an interactive session. Jump in with your questions at any point or pop them in the chat. Laughlin's keeping an eye on that. If you don't have your video on, you are just part of the background audience. If your video does go on, you will be part of the gallery. So do jump in with any questions. Thank you, Nancy, for answering that. And I think Heather's going to pick up now on some of the considerations around are you ready to international fundraise? Oh, we do.
Right. Well, and I would.
Oh, we do have a question here.
Oh, sure.
We do from John Thompson. What is the turnaround time from when a donation is received to the US fund and we here in New Zealand are notified that a gift was received?
Well, we aim to send the receipt out to a donor the day that we get the money, and then a copy of the receipt or notification of that donation goes into your share file. So you get that the day that that the donations come in, and then we make grants quarterly. So you'd actually have the funds in New Zealand in within 3 months, sooner if there's an urgent thing. But so basically, it's if it's a donation online, it's all pretty instantaneous. If it's a donation by check, which they still use, of course, in America, there's little things that look like that with your name written up, scribbled all over it. But when it gets to us in the post or a bank transfer, as soon as we're notified of that, then we send out the receipt. So it's pretty quick, because again, that's the whole point of the exercise, is to make sure that you can then get a hold of and steward your donor as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and most ethical kind of guidelines suggest that we should be thanking and receiving donors within 48 hours. So we all have to hold ourselves to those same standards internationally or locally. Heather, over to you.
Yes, and I would just piggyback on that and say as well, so, I can only speak for how we do it at Chapel in New York, but if someone makes a donation to your fund at one of our foundations, as soon as the gift is processed, the donor gets a receipt, you receive a notification at the same time by emails, and with all the details that the donor has agreed to share, so you can do the donor relations bit. Other partners, it may vary. If you've got your own entity, then that's going to depend as well, because it depends who's processing the gifts for you. What are they getting around to doing the banking pieces with them or whatever, or reconciling your online portal if you've got one? What are they doing the receipts, and when do they get that back to you on the fundraising team? So it can vary, but ideally you've got a partner who's, as Michelle said, adhering to that same kind of gold standard of turning around the thank you and as well as a notification to you within 24 hours. 48 if it's really busy, but really trying to provide that same level of service that you'd want to do in-house for your own gift processing. So talking a little bit about how do you know when you're ready to start international fundraising, or when you should start international fundraising? I think the thing to keep in mind is that if you don't know that you have supporters in another country, you're not ready. I think there's sometimes this mindset of like, oh, if we just set something up, the donors will come. There's an American movie called Field of Dreams where this guy's building a baseball field, trying to attract these baseball players from the past, and they keep hearing throughout the movie, if you build it, they will come. It doesn't work that way with fundraising. You can't just create something and expect donors to just magically appear and start giving to you. So I would say international, you don't want to start with acquisition in starting your international fundraising. You want to start with cultivation, start with cultivating individuals or foundations or corporate donors, whatever those connections are that you already have in the other country. Start with that cultivation. And that's actually where I would recommend starting for international fundraising before you start forming any formal partnerships or thinking about an entity or anything else. Looking at what the potential is, looking at what the relationships are, and knowing what the possibilities are, should those relationships bear fruit, but really ensuring that you've got a solid foundation of support before you start investing too much there. The great thing with fundraising today is there's so much more that can be done virtually, even domestically in country with your fundraising. There's more donor visits happening over Zoom. There's more virtual or hybrid events. There's a lot more ways to connect, and it's just becoming more normalized, which is a great opportunity for international fundraising. If it's something that was out of reach before due to budget or due to just time, it's a lot more efficient both in cost and time to be able to do international fundraising now. You don't have to get on a 17-hour flight to go abroad somewhere and then be away for 2 weeks having a series of meetings in all these different cities. You can schedule a lot of very smartly informed Zoom calls with your key supporters and have conversations. So step one is determining what is the potential in the country you're considering. What relationships are there? What are the interests? What opportunities can you offer them to support that are going to connect? And then the other piece of that as well is, how do you talk to those potential donors in other countries? Because they can't just drive by and see what you're doing. They can't come and visit and see the impact of their donation. So the way you approach them and the motivations for giving might be a bit different. They're the same in that donors give from the heart. We like to think it's a financial decision that they're really weighing out, but people give to people, and there's a lot of that personal connection and the personal feelings that they have about your cause. So whether that's someone who's an alumnus of your university, whether that's a grateful patient, or perhaps they have family who received care if you're a health facility, or maybe you're working on a social cause that's very near and dear to them. Maybe they've had personal experience with it, or someone close to them has. Even in thinking about environmental causes, what are the connections that you can make that are relevant to the context in which that donor is versus in the country where you are located? And how do you connect those two? So I'm thinking of, for schools and universities, for example, it may not be as interesting for them to fund a capital project if it's not something they're going to be able to see. If you're talking about, oh, well, you can put your name on it, and touting naming opportunities and things, that's probably not the best motivator. But if you talk about, remember when you had your student experience and walking through campus or going to the library and seeing your classmates and how you could collaborate and not just learn but make friendships. When you want to create that opportunity for future generations of students, that's the kind of thing that's going to resonate a bit more. It's not a naming opportunity where somebody's going to be able to go by and see their mark literally on his building, but it's going to be what's going to be meaningful to them in terms of legacy that they can create for future beneficiaries of your organization, whether that's a school or whether that's a service organization. It's going to be about things of paying things forward. So is this someone who they or someone close to them has benefited from the service or cause that you're offering, and wanting to give back out of gratitude or be able to create those same opportunities for others? But really thinking about those connections and relationships and the emotions that they have in the connection to your cause, not just what they can see, the tangible bits, but kind of what's going to cross the border, what's going to make that long distance relationship work between the two of you. So I think really a lot of the things are the same that you would do for your normal fundraising, and building the relationship and in that cultivation with the donor, really listening to what they care about, what motivates them, and then thinking, how does that connect across an ocean? What's going to make them feel like they're here and making a difference, even if they're physically not here. So really kind of shifting your perspective a bit to see through the eyes of someone who's not in country with you. And I think related to that as well is thinking about your communications and having systems in place before you start your international fundraising. Because again, that donor is not going to be there. They don't have the benefit of proximity. They can't come to events. They can't do the same things that your local donors can. So that means you need to be more proactive and communicating to be able to steward that relationship, to let them know how their gift made a difference, to help them feel they're part of what you're doing, even though they're not there. So I think the engagement and connection is even more important. So having those communication systems in place, thinking about how you can leverage digital technology to bring what you're doing to life for someone who can't see it in person. So can you do embedded videos in email? Can you be tailoring some personal messages to them? Can you be holding things like virtual town halls or advisory cabinet meetings that you can invite them in, where it's not just a pushing out information to them, but inviting two-way engagement across the kilometers, where again they're actively participating in what you're doing versus just passively receiving information. Because the more engagement you can offer, the more connected that donor is going to feel, and the more likely they're going to not just give, but continue giving to you. So I think those are kind of some key pieces to have in mind.
I'm just going to jump in with a really dumb question.
Sure.
Is international fundraising for major gifts and bequests only?
No, it is not. And there are no dumb questions. The only dumb questions are the ones you don't ask. No, I think honestly, your international audiences can be a great audience for annual giving, for Giving Day campaigns, because again, it's a very interesting way you can encourage participation at the same time you're reaching out to other people and be able to, especially on things like a Giving Day, to have a social media campaign around it, and something on your website and little communications throughout the day. And even if you can, have a map showing where people are giving, but builds that sense of community. But even absent a Giving Day, just the annual fund still makes such a difference. And if you've got, this is where I would say you should have a partner in place, or, have some way of receiving the gifts in country before you start. So you don't want to suddenly find yourself with 100 donors who want to make, $50 gifts from the US and then have to figure out what to do about those. But the annual funds are a good way for someone to kind of test, what's it like? What's the giving experience like to be giving abroad from where I am? And how are they going to treat me? Are they going to forget about me again until the next time they want a gift from me? So I think it's a great way to build trust and start that donor relationship. And again, all of the major donors started as just regular donors at some point. It's very rare that somebody just walks in the door and says, I want to give you, 2 million pounds. Hi, my name is, there's been some kind of growth over time and relationship building. So again, I don't think you need to shy away from that. In fact, we do see a lot of, at Chapel New York, we see a lot of our clients, including their international supporters in their annual campaigns. So I think it's a great way to grow those connections.
I think it's also worth mentioning that um, it is also possible, depending on what the cause is or what the needs are, to get fundraising from trusts and foundations, in other words, grant-making bodies and corporate fundraising, and even governmental fundraising, depending on what the issues are. So and a lot of the thinking about what you're doing. I mean, obviously, if you're a university or a school, you've got the advantage of knowing that, I mean, you will know that you have people abroad. I mean, it just happens. Almost no one, unless you're, somewhere in the middle of, I don't know, the outback, do you not have, of international students or your own students who have moved abroad. And I keep thinking we should do some research into um, how that works. So that, in other words, particularly with your own people who have moved abroad, how, do they go native, or do they become more whatever they were to start with? So Michelle, are you more Scottish now than you were in Scotland? Kind of, or are you starting to, to say good day? Um, you know, um, and it's a really interesting question, because because for one of the issues becomes that a lot of people really then, and the longer they're away, often, and I think almost everybody I'm that I know here has been abroad or lived abroad, they actually want that relationship back to their home, even if they are never going to live back there, they're never doing anything back there. And so, if you're the school that they went to, the university that they went to, you know, that relationship with you can actually get stronger the longer they're away. And so that, when you're thinking about what you can do for them, the wonderful, photograph of their dorm, or the house they were living in, can often be something that they won't want on their wall. And it also helps them confirm their own identity, because they can show people, in their new location, this is where I come from and this is what helped make me. So I think there's a lot of that, but also there's foundations that will give to a number of things around the world. And sometimes it's harder. And particularly American foundations that say we give to the best, we give to the best cancer research in the world, and then you find out that all they really do is give to the local hospital. But that's more about appropriate research than there not being foundations that are available. Again, like all these things, though, it's about, the return on your investment, how much time and energy you're going to put into something, and ensuring that you know why you're doing that particular kind of fundraising from something, rather than just thinking that it sounds like a good idea.
So the trust and foundation one, that's an interesting one. If as an organisation who wanted to potentially access international trusts or foundations, and they're using an intermediary like Chapel in York, who does the submission for those? Is that the organisation to you, and then you submit it? How does that work?
It really depends. Generally, what happens is that the foreign organization will submit the application listing us as their fiscal sponsor or their local partner, if they want to. Sometimes you don't need a local partner or a local organization if you're making an application, because they will fund things directly outside the country, because there's not a tax deduction or gift aid or any of those things involved. It's more about that particular organization. So but it's always useful to know what's going on. And this is, I think, the other thing about all of this is so much about knowing what you're dealing with. What's the culture in the country is not just about individuals. What's the expectation there? It's also about American foundations are wonderful in terms of telling you what exactly they give to and what the application process needs to be, whereas British ones and European ones are often much looser in terms of, well, tell us what you need and maybe tell us how much you want, kind of thing. So it's really important to know what the whole whether it's individuals or foundations or even companies. Companies are fascinating, of course, because so often it's almost a case of seeing what's local and then say, well, if you've got another place that you'd rather give, support us through, we can take that money as well. But so it's all about knowing, again, so much of fundraising and so much of life, isn't it, is about doing your homework and knowing what you're doing when you start out, because that's going to save you time and money rather than rushing forwards and then trying to figure out what the situation is or failing and then wondering why you failed.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point, Nancy. It's you almost are building relationships with those organizations in the same way you would with an individual. That's my advice with some of the foundation fundraising or even the corporate giving is if you can find a contact and actually get them on the phone or on Zoom or have a conversation to say, look, we're considering putting an application. It says that you fund this. This is what we're thinking of putting in our proposal. Do you think that's a connection? And kind of having that inside connection to just chat with somebody and figure out how do I structure this grant proposal or funding proposal in the way that's going to best position us for success versus just having a look at their website, making your best guess and sending it off into the void and hoping that the void sends something back. So kind of having that person that you can connect with is always useful. And I think especially doing that in a different country, even more so because what we haven't talked about, but it's kind of the unspoken secret about international fundraising is that it's very, very rarely somebody's primary role. It's this thing that got tacked on to the work they're already doing, either because they were interested in it and nobody else was doing it, so they just took it on, or there was a boss who said, right, we want you to start fundraising in the UK or the US or Hong Kong or wherever that might be. Figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
On top of all the other things you're already doing. So I think Nancy's joke is usually that the international fundraising is a thing that people do at 2 a.m. after they've done all their other work before they collapse into bed at night.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many people move around the world. I mean, having come to Australia, it's such a bigger country. People are moving all the time, and I wonder how many, not schools and universities, because I think there's a real kind of thinking that international fundraising is just for alumni and it's actually for charitable organizations too. But how many charities, if they receive notification from a donor, this is my last regular gift or appeal gift, I'm moving, how many of them then have a communication that automatically gives them everything they need to understand that they can still continue to donate when they move, even just having that in place?
Right. Yeah. And that's the thing. It's even if right now international fundraising doesn't seem like, something that would be viable to really put a big investment in, just knowing what the possibilities are and how you would respond should there be an interest or should that notification come through. As you said, your donor tells you that they're moving abroad. Well, you've got two choices. You can continue the relationship with them, with this person who's already demonstrated that they care about you and want to support you. Or you can say, right, good luck, and, and hope someone comes along to fill their shoes, which, in today's fundraising space, I don't think anyone really wants to just write that off. So
we have another question here.
Oh, sure.
As Chapel New York's US fund is a registered 501c3 in the US, does the fund appear on GuideStar so that the participants in the fund can see who the board members are, etc.?
Yes, it does.
I wish I knew what that meant.
So GuideStar, which is so GuideStar and Fundraising Center merged to a new company called Candid, but it was GuideStar for decades in the US. But essentially it's a search engine, specifically if you want to go and look up a charity. And it's not that you have to go on to set up your profile. You would go on and claim your profile, because if you are a US 501c3 and you file your 990, which is a tax filing, they automatically populate it on their website in that search engine. So anyone can go and look at your filing. But if you really want donors to have a bit more confidence in you and then be able to kind of create a fuller picture about you besides just the numbers that were reported on your tax filing, you claim your profile and add details such as your board members, what your mission is, do you adhere to ethical practices, what are policy things you have in place, is there a board orientation for your board members? There's a lot of different questions, and it's up to you can post your financials, the detailed financials. So it's really the onus is on the US 501c3 to round out that profile. But again, the more transparent you can be there, the more confidence a donor would have when they go there to look at your profile and see, oh yes, right, they're doing good things, and they're happy to talk about it.
Thank you, says John Thompson. Thank you, John, for your questions. Okay, Heather, moving on to, we've got a couple of questions in terms of successful campaigns. People love practical examples. Can you highlight a successful campaign? Maybe we do have schools audience, school and kind of non-school that you can look back on that is successfully internationally fundraising. I know there's probably hundreds of them.
I can think of there's one that comes to mind. It's actually University of Melbourne, and they've got they're working in multiple countries around the world. So they've been they started out with their own entity in the US, which they later said, no thanks, let's work through a partner. But they're fundraising in the US, the UK, and Hong Kong, and doing quite well. And engaging not just individual donors, but they've taken that step, as we were just saying, with reaching out to foundations and trusts and corporations, and making a good case for support for the work they're doing. Some of it's been research work, some of the individual giving has been for more around like student scholarships and just general educational support, but really actively engaging their alumni as well as those funders that they know would have an interest in the work they're doing. So in the case of doing our homework, as Nancy said, they certainly do their homework on all these different countries to really know where their supporters are and where they might find new supporters. So as I said, acquisition should not be the first step that you take with international fundraising, but as you start to build the relationships, those connections have their own connections, and you start to widen the circle out. So you get people who can be your ambassadors on the ground to make those other connections for you, to make the introductions. I think one thing I've seen universities do very well, in addition to just their donors reaching out to peer groups and things and encouraging them to be involved, but having those supporters act as alumni ambassadors. So if you've got international students who are applying, having somebody in country that they can meet with and share their experience about the university, who, of course, if they're already supporting you, must love you. So they're going to say good things, and that just feeds the pipeline of students coming over. So again, that engagement bit and helping people find a way to make a difference. And I think that University of Melbourne and others have done a great job at really having a very global presence, all from Melbourne.
Awesome. And do you have any figures? Give us some figures, Nancy or Heather. What is the value of international fundraising? Is it rising? What's the kind of state of nation?
I have a real thing against figures that are just global. So in other words, we could say $2 billion come from America every year. Means absolutely nothing to an individual organization, because that just, that's what fundraising consultants throw out to show they've done research before talking. To me, it's much more personal. What's appropriate. I'd like to mention two situations. One is we have a charity in Ireland that they're building a retreat center, and they went to America to raise. These are just American examples, but they work in other countries. They wanted to raise, I think it was about $50,000 when they went there, thinking, well, this would really work. They're at about 16 million at the moment, and they've had a couple of really, really, really good donors, and that's been unbelievably successful. On the other hand, there's a UK school that had their own 501c3. It's an unbelievably well-known school. I'm not going to say who it is, but it has, the name recognition is just out there. They raised annually about 25,000 US dollars and they had somebody on their board that was a billionaire, but they were just not culturally up for asking for big donations. They just sort of took 1,000, 2,000 pounds from people, dollars from people. And it was just, you just wanted to shake them and say, oh my God, people are so incredibly well known that you ought to be raising hundreds of millions, but their mindset was not there. Because I suspect even in the UK, they were raising small amounts of money from the donor base and things. Because there's also sometimes a perception amongst schools that you can't ask for big transformational gifts. Those only go to universities. And it's absolutely true. You're in competition with other, parts of a person's life voyage. But that's not to say that, transformational gifts aren't out there. But so there's a huge range of things. And I think for me, the very most important thing that keeps coming up over and over and over is if you don't ask, you won't get it. And if you ask for $1,000 or £1,000 or €1,000, you're going to get €1,000 or $1,000 or £1,000. But if your person's capable of giving you 100,000, first of all, just like you would do proper research about the person at home, you need to ask for 100,000. And if you don't ask at all, you're not going to get anything. And if you're not trying, you're not going to get anything. So
I'm guessing yeah. Sorry, Nancy.
Yeah, that's right. I'm in full flow. You need to just stop.
I suggest that the Irish campaign had a much more compelling story than the well-known school might have had.
Absolutely not at all. It was purely purely they got lucky. They found some people who gave them some incredibly large gifts. But truthfully, the school just and I can't tell you how many times I said to them, you should be doing this. You just need to ask for more, and they never did. They just really literally never asked for saying, we need X amount to build a new building or whatever. They literally asked for small amounts of money, and that's what they got from people who could have given them transformational gifts. Whereas the Irish charity asked for transformational gifts. So but that's also after you've done the homework about who you're talking to. And there's some luck involved.
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue too into I was talking earlier about making sure you're making a compelling case that's relevant for someone who's in a different country from you, who is going to be motivated by different things, but also understanding the cultural context of fundraising in that country. When Nancy was mentioning, you wouldn't ask these people in the UK for a gift. If you're fundraising in America, you better ask for the gift. People are waiting for it. They're anticipating, why haven't they asked me? And then they'll get insulted if you don't ask. So I think, again, just kind of understanding the different culture that you're in and those cultural norms around giving as well. So what you experience with donors who are based in Hong Kong, for example, and some of the other Asian countries is going to be very more reserved and less overt than what you might experience in America, where, from October 1st, essentially now, was October 15th, it keeps getting earlier, through 31st December, you're going to be bombarded with fundraising appeals, until the tax year ends. And no one gets bothered by it. It's just a normal thing. So, even now the new thing in the US is that the last 3 days of the year is when you do a really multifaceted email campaign where you're reaching out through email multiple times those last 3 days, reminding people that the tax year is ending, and to ask them if they want to make a last minute gift, even if they've already given. Just have you thought about what your taxes are going to be this year? Do you want to make another gift? And that's fine, but you wouldn't do that in the UK. You certainly wouldn't do that in a lot of places. So again, we've said it a few times, but doing your homework, understanding not just your prospective donors, but also understanding the cultural context in that country as to what's going to be appropriate, um, what might even be expected. So what are you missing if you're not doing something? And, how is that adversely affecting the relationship? But again, just really doing your research the same way that you would do at home. Just this added layer of the cultural norms on top of it.
Fabulous. Listen, we are in the last 5 minutes of the webinar today. It's gone super quick. If anyone has any final questions, please pop them in the chat. Lachlan is there. Nancy, I'm going to come back to you. Can you give us, I guess, and either of you two, your top three kind of, what are the three things that you want to leave people with at the end of this webinar in terms of the possibilities of international fundraising?
Yeah, okay. That's a good one. Well, the first thing is, don't do it if it's not right for you. The second thing is, if you are going to do international fundraising, it doesn't have to be a huge thing. It could be a small thing. It could be 3 people in another country. That's international fundraising. But if you're going to do it well. I've always had a thing about people checking their brains at the airport, and so that they don't do things in other countries that they would do at home. And the third thing is, treat your international donors as well or better than you would your local donors.
Thank you. Heather.
Yes, I would say, number one, you don't have to be in front of someone to provide excellent donor relations. Especially in today's world, there are so many great tools and channels that you can use to build strong connections without having to physically be there. Two, and I'm going to sound, and so I'm a broken record because we've been saying it all through this webinar, but do your homework. Know who your donors or prospective donors are before you get started. Know what you might do should an international opportunity present itself, versus scrambling to figure it out after the fact. Understand the cultural norms around fundraising and think about how your case for support needs to be adapted in that other country. So do the homework. And then third, I would say, we've talked about schools and universities a lot, but you don't have to be a school or university with alumni or students around the world to do international fundraising. We work with a lot of great arts and culture organizations. We work with a lot of environmental causes. We work with healthcare and research institutions. It's really about understanding who cares about you and knowing where to find them. So again, I can give an example. There's a lovely Australian dance company that we work with that has a great amount of donors in other countries, because it started out with people who had gone to a show while they were traveling to Australia and fell in love with it. But then they went back home and they told their friends about it. So again, you don't have to have an existing massive network of people who are kind of like your built-in prospects as you would with a school. You just have to have a few people who care about you in that other country who are willing to help make connections. You can see international fundraising grow that way. So again, don't feel you can't do it if you're not a school or university. All you need are people in a different country who care about you.
Yeah, and that sounds like a great opportunity. We know how important donor surveys are each year. And if you have no idea about your donors and you're going to do a donor survey as an organization, why not pop in some questions around where were you born? Do you have family overseas? Like, find out a little bit more about the family. You're right, it's incredible. And it made me think, I don't donate to any Scottish charities anymore. But I tell you, if a Scottish charity wrote to me from Aberdeen and said, Michelle, will you give me money? I'd say yes. So I think they don't, that's what we've got to do. You've got to dig a bit deeper, and there are opportunities in donor newsletters, donor surveys. Find all the opportunities to find out more about your donors, extended fan out friends, where they've lived, where they might have went to university overseas as well. So lots of information, and just use all of those opportunities, I would suggest. Thank you all for joining us today. Nancy, you can go to bed. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. Truly international, from Melbourne to the UK to New York and New Zealand. Thank you so much. We will share this recording for the people that have missed it. And if you're watching the recording, do reach out. We are connected with Heather as a maven, and I'm sure she'll answer any questions after this event. And I'd like to thank you all again and huge thank you to Chapel in York for supporting our Freedom Friday initiative. It is, it's my vision that eventually everyone has 2 hours on a Friday across the world to learn and know more. And can you imagine the impact that would have on our fundraising? So thank you all so much for joining us today. And that's all for Freedom Friday this Friday. That's a wrap. And ka kite, and thank you. Goodbye, New Zealand, Australia, and everywhere else.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much.
See ya.